we pursue our reflection, I'd like to dwell for a few moments as we worship and adore on the act in which we are involved right now and its implications and consequences with regard to its proliferation and capillary effect on all. We know that when we are before our King, we are in some way enthroning him. That happens on different levels. I was mentioning to someone that in the specifically Trappist regime, the Cistercian regime, which has its own usages, some of which are found also in the Carthusian ones, because the old medieval orders keep what they had when they were founded, and both of them were founded before the genuflection came in. Apparently genuflecting came in with the Crusades because they were wearing heavy armour and it was easier for them to genuflect than to do what they had been doing for generations and centuries before then, and which they still do in the East, the profound bow. They call it proskunesis in the East, which actually means prostration. And they have a way of doing it which involves actually going like this and touching the ground and so on. In the East they still have it on Mount Athos, and in general it's very much courant. In the West we had something equivalent, this profound bow. There were 3 degrees of bowing, we were taught. One is the inclination of the head, which is still there, and it's actually in the books that we had. Every name of Jesus and Mary in the liturgical books had it in capital letters, and there was a profound, an inclination of the head at those. The mediocre bow would be one which involved this kind of position, only from that part of the body would be moving only. Then there was the profound bow, which of course happened at the end of every psalm, and it still happens actually most at the end of the psalm. There's a profound bow at the glory be to the Father, and so on. And then also, as I say, with regard to coming into church or passing for the Blessed Sacrament, that would be there also, this profound bow. No question having been there, and still no question actually, even at the consecration at Mass, in the Cistercian Rite and Carthusian Rite, there is no genuflection. They have remained where they were when they were founded, therefore the profound bow is there. And the Carthusian Rite also, by the way, just for information, one doesn't actually have an elevation of the chalice because they were founded before that came in later. The chalice is covered with the corporal. One doesn't actually see it, and it's slightly, the corporal is removed at consecration, there's a tiny elevation that's covered immediately. So, in other words, different rites go back to where they were founded. So, the question then of what happened then when one came into church at the beginning of the day, whereas before, on other occasions when we're coming to church and would have the profound bow, at the first entry into church there at the beginning of the day for vigils, that is in the heart of the night, there would have been going to the altar steps actually and kneeling, and that was a direct handing over of all to the Majesty. In fact, the expression ad majestatem is the classical one used for when one is in choir and one turns all together towards the presence, towards the Majesty, instead of facing each other in choir. At some occasion we actually go to face together the Majesty. That was the expression used, ad majestatem. Well, that Majesty was enthroned physically at the first encounter with it, coming into church in the heart of night, and going therefore on both knees before the high altar and the Blessed Sacrament. And also it would have been there if on those rare occasions when one might have to go out of church, not out of church actually, but out of the enclosure for some errand or whatever, or for at least for a time, coming back, the first thing that one did was not anything human but divine, straight away into the Abbey Church and on both knees acknowledge the Majesty. He is the master of the house, and therefore the courtesy is to salute him first. And also if any guest came, e.g. on retreat, the guest master was to do the same, to take the person first of all to salute the Majesty, and therefore God is God physically in the way that we handle him with our body. So when we come into adoration, that's the backdrop. We're doing precisely that. We're actually not just coming with our brain, which is a very Protestant attitude, because Protestants have a maximal use of the brain. They cultivate it very well, but they only have the brain essentially, and also they have usually a good use of the voice box, notably in preaching, praying and singing, but it stops there. There's very little other movement. But our body does enter into play as it does in the East, so it's kind of important to be aware of all that, because if one gets into the other thing of purely an intellectual, a cerebral cult when it comes to adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, and that's happening. It's inadequate, because one finds in many places of adoration they don't even provide kneelers. The people are sitting in fairly comfortable accommodation of some kind, and there they are, as though they were in the cinema. Well, it's not quite what it's about. There is this element actually of handing over the Lord's rights on the physical and visual level, that enters into it. And I've seen that actually young people, and also in the charismatic renewal, they cop onto that spontaneously without being taught it. I remember in Taizé, I was there, about a week of us, the ambassadors from Wales went in 1990, and there were at one point there was 7,000, I think by the end there were 12,000 young people there in Taizé when we were there, and you could actually see how the Spirit was forming them without any fuss or bother, because that was spontaneously there. The instinct to use one's body was there, and also to keep silence. And these things matter too, because the protection of the Majesty is silence or sustained chant. To invade it, because there's a weakness in silence, as in the monastic life, where if you've got a talking monk, a chatterbox, he ruins the sounds of everyone. It's common property. You can't do that. It's an invasion of other people's interior and exterior beauty. So also in church, if you invade somebody else's adoration through talking, it's quite offensive to the Majesty itself. Therefore, the cushion of protection also enters into it, that one creates either an elevating harmonious beauty with e.g. Taizé chant or whatever, or just pure silence protected there, and also a suggestiveness of orientating all the intention, and that can happen even physically. The way that it's done properly in quite a lot of places of adoration, they actually focus it with good lighting on one spot. That actually matters. The lighting comes into play, because loud light is noisy psychologically, but dimmed light, well focused, is in some way interiorizing. So it all comes into play. We honour the Lord by all the means that we have of making things suggestive, because it works both ways. As does incense, it honours Him, but also elevates our senses and therefore our mind to something greater. I remember when I was about 13, our Sunday school teacher took us to a Eastern Orthodox celebration in Cardiff. First of all, I came across incense, and certainly the first time I came across that kind of celebration, and it is actually quite powerful to somebody who's not come across that before, because it hits everyone. This is otherness. This is not just kind of homemade stuff or homegrown. It's something from the distant past, and also to something hugely above our heads. In other words, one is crashing into a whole different domain, because a lot, believe you me, in the Protestant sphere depends on the goodness, the capacity, the charism, essentially, of one human being. If you look at the way a Protestant church, I mean a non-conformist, evangelical, whatever church is constructed, it focuses on the pulpit, basically, therefore the charism of the person who's there. It can be for their good or for their harm, because if he's a good man, he can do a lot of good. If he's not, you're in trouble. So the advantage of having the Lord enthroned at that point of orientation is great. So anyway, in that, we have to be aware that when we are in any form of verticality of honouring Him, it has to be honouring Him, and not more of this horizontality coming into it. And that's happening, and that's actually happening more than one thinks, because our worship, if it's to be authentic, has to be obedient and humble, not drawing attention to itself. And that, by the way, is another sort of error, when one is so conscious of the materiality of the cult, e.g. perfection of movements, music, whatever it might be, that becomes then the draining focus of attention. You see what's going on there. The Lord is there, yes, and we're doing it for His honour, but it's not exactly what He entirely wants, because He has to be thought about. He has to be the centre of attention, so He can actually minister to us, and we're not looking at what is only in His service, but actually Him. Therefore, this sustains a whole atmosphere in which He may reign. It's creating sacred space, basically, on every level. Now, in adoration specifically then, one is creating the maximal opportunity for Him to reign. Now, we need to be ministered to on several levels. The advantage of a fairly long cult is that it gives us that separation from what is not God. Now, the B side of our heavy sacramental life compared with the East, I mean, a frequent reception of the sacraments and a frequent celebration of the sacraments in general, is that we do things on automatic pilot. We do things coming from somewhere else, presuming that we can get the graces. Well, they're there. But whether we benefit from them is a different question. Because if the Lord is finding that before him he has people who have just come and are just about to leave, there's a limit in which he can actually get through to us. Because there are several barrages psychologically going on in our head before he can get through to us. We're coming into a place of prayer, and what's happening? First of all, we're out of breath physically. We're sitting down, we're saying ciao to the next person next to us, and then we're sort of getting into mode. Well, see, these things, they're cluttering the mind straight away. Physically, it matters if the heart is beating slowly, if we're coming in a calmness of physicity or not. Because the mind also is agitated when there is much physical movement. If the heart is beating, the mind is not at rest. So these are all disfavouring receptivity. We're still pumping away, a barrage. So, okay, we're calming down a bit. What's going on then? A liturgical celebration, and the priest might come on. And then, it depends a lot on the celebration, but if you're not careful, if he's a particularly wordy priest, he'll have nothing but words from one end to the other of the celebration, not a pause. Now, that's not going to help interiority. It's intellectual. The mind is again functioning all the time. Now, do you see what's going on? We're contaminated because that is just more of what we had before we came in. If you look at the normal person's day out there, all his day is full of words. All the time, we're now forced to listen to words. Now, more of the same thing is not what we want when it comes to that one space in which we're going to meet our God. Add to that, even on a Sunday, that the optic, at least in some cultures, is, it seems, to get to the end. And for that to happen, making everything as brief as possible, including the maximal point of encounter of all, Holy Communion, then we're in trouble. If you analyse and observe just calmly what's going on in the average parish around, it's multiplied, that is the points of distribution of Holy Communion and so on, to such an extent that it is intuited that at that point, already at Holy Communion, once we've received the host, it's all over. Because we're straight then into the church notices, which is the important bit of the parish encounter. That's when things are administratively decided for the week, it would seem. Now, what's going on there? A whole parish, at the high point of its life, coming to do what? More of the same thing. And how many really enter into deep mode at that point? That one point that heaven has access to them on earth. It's big trouble, you know. It's activism affecting even our liturgical life. We're fidgets before our God, and he can't get through. So he's put on people's hearts all through Ireland this moment, extended all over the place, thank God, where he can reign and get through and break down these successive barriers that we have wanted to have to make sure that he can't get through to us. But he can, if we're not careful, happen there again. What do? We're at adoration. We look around. Quite a few people actually, during the whole time they're there, don't really at all. They might have a book. Already the fact of sitting and so on is not going to help, because it actually makes a huge difference psychologically, the position that we're in. They may, if they're good, pious Catholics, use that time to catch up on all their vocal prayer. All the time they're there, they may be doing vocal prayer without a stop. Okay, it's prayer. But again, it's a form of subtle barrage. It can be what he wants us there for. Look at me! Let me look at you. Now that's kind of important because we may be into it ourselves. Now lots and lots of things actually over the Christian globe happen and have happened in Eucharistic adoration. For one thing, lots of vocations are born, classically. There are times and seasons which favour that. One high point often is the Easter Triduum. Another one is retreats, the moments in which we give the Lord his rights and we create the space where he can be Lord. But in general, if adoration is within our grasp in a quiet chapel or church, potentially we will receive many graces. Potentially. He's just asking that we do our bit. So let's look at one or two situations to handle when we're actually there. Calmness is something which operates on the psychological level and on the physical. And to address that, I just want to quote what the Lord himself taught to a holy nun who was of perpetual adoration herself, a Capuchin nun of perpetual adoration, Sister Consolata Petrone. The Lord gave her a spirituality in which this element was there, and it's something we can take with us. Because the Lord is a Lord of peace. He taught her this: if the soul can keep calm, then she will remain master of herself. Now that can start when we're looking at him. Why? He is calmness itself, unchanging and unruffled. And then normally, by osmosis, that will creep into us and come with us. That's the point. Come with us. And give us this mastery of our own reactions. Because if we're not calm, we're not in control. And the consequences can be devastating. When we lose control, we are unable to command ourselves. It's like a machine without anyone guiding it. The words are the first things to get out of control. And when we start, we can't stop. And the Lord goes on, but if she is perturbed, then it is easy for her to fall. So perturbation, that's in some translations of the prayer that we have just after the Our Father. Going back to the Latin, perturbation is something that we should avoid. And he goes on, indicating that he cannot really work in a soul that is troubled, precisely one that has lost its calm. And he compares it to a muddy pond or lake. If you stir it, it's all there. He wants it crystal clear and unruffled. Now he's like that. So when we're coming into a moment of looking at him, looking at the eyes that are looking at us, we're looking at fundamental and unaltered calm. So this kind of matters. Because if we have a regular encounter with that heavenly and unchanging calm, which rules the aeons, then in some way we're bound to come back into the normality of the after with a relativity of view. Because if we're making a cosmic issue of every word, of every moment, of every action, then we're bound to lose our peace. If, on the other hand, we're looking at the eyes that look at all time in one go, and at us too, then we're a little bit more relativized and put in perspective with regard to the issues, what matters and what matters less. Because what matters fundamentally is him and encounter with him. Therefore, maintaining the peace also on every level, and maintaining as far as possible that sacred space where? Well, in our soul. Because once we're out of the immediate of the encounter, then the sacred space is what we're carrying. We carry our soul, we carry it in our body, as long as we're in this world, therefore certain calmness of the body helps also. But we are the only ones responsible for the damage that happens in that realm. Therefore, and this is what I want to lead to, we do this element of protecting the encounter also in the after, which is the before of the next encounter. E.g., those words that we don't have to have coming all the time to solicit our attention, because our interior life is impoverished by too many messages. Just yesterday or the day before, I happened to come across something in a religious magazine, I think it was the St. Anthony Messenger, which somebody gave to me, which had something to say on the issue of modern solitude. It was a picture of a lot of people, mainly young, and people in general. They were there on the steps of some big building, waiting for something to happen. There they were, all next to each other, but all in a planet apart from each other. Each one, more or less, with a mobile phone or something. In other words, that was the centre of attention. What was going on? Typical people of today, as soon as they're alone, they're fidgeting with a mobile phone, or even more modern things now than before. In other words, messages. Now, be careful, because that can be us too. If we're not careful, we do the same thing, and we are unable to be with silence. Because the Lord is a Lord of silence, and we're being contaminated by too many words. And it's very difficult for the Lord of silence, who is the creative word, to whisper a word to a noisy interior. So this preservation of the sacred continues where we are afterwards. People that we mix with, it matters too. He said in teaching St. Faustina that he did not really want her to be with people of that nature too much, because they actually do influence us. He himself found it hard, he was explaining, to get through to a person who was very talkative. And recollection is something to be cultivated. Therefore, we damage ourselves through being a lot of time, without necessity, with people who can't stop emitting words, messages, and loud noise. And the television and radio are objects, not people, but objects doing that. So if we willingly put on that object, well, we've got to bear the consequences. But excluding that intimacy with him, and certainly damaging that sacred space. These things are concrete issues. But also, in general, as we go through our life, we only have one life, so it's not indifferent who we're giving large chunks of time to. If we have a choice, and if charity is equal, it's better not to be with those who are going to, in some way, invade us on that level. Okay, we'll leave it with that now for the time being, but it's kind of important material. And remember how the Lord was asleep when they crossed that Sea of Galilee one time, and the storm broke out there. We have it in the 8th chapter of St. Luke. And they woke him and said, actually twice, it's in the Greek, Despota, Despota, Lord or Master, Master, we are going down. He calmly, of course, rebuked the elements. But there is there also another deep meaning. He is, as it were, there and apparently for us asleep, but he's there. And our agitation can be a sign of lack of trust. There is an element in some way of leaning upon power and wisdom, because if we, as it were, get over-agitated and want to heal the universe at every point, we'll never ever be at peace. So a certain abdication with regard to what's going on around us can help. We don't have to say everything, have to address everything, have to do everything ourselves. Many good souls damage completely their journey through life through getting involved with everything and anything all the time. Ave Virgin corpus natum,